Live streaming, right?
Yes.
Which means
Which means that they have your Sorry, I should have mentioned that.
no. Oh no, it'll be as part of the Q&A, I think, at the end.
Right. Which you might mention it ahead of time.
Thank you. I tell you, I'm suddenly feeling better about it. No. Yeah, I'm working on it. No, the rest is fine. So tired. Okay, good. Okay, we're good. Good morning, everyone. It is still morning. We have 21 minutes left in morning. Morning as in joy. I hope everyone has had their lunch and enjoyed it. We want to thank the University Club for a wonderful meal and our school for making it possible. I hope everyone has had the opportunity to either register or re-register, but you'll have an opportunity on your way out. Thank you, and welcome to our NASW-USC Unit public policy event. That's a lot of words. For those of us, faculty, staff, students, alumni from the school, from the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work, this event is being live streamed. So my students know that when it comes to technology, I have something to learn, but I do work at it. But in all seriousness, it's being also recorded, which is wonderful, so that our VAC students are able to participate and learn together. Our event is entitled Election 2016, What's at Stake? Implications for Social Workers. My name is Peter Braun, and I'm chair of public policy for our NASW unit here at USC. I'm on faculty at our school, and I'm adjunct lecturer in Kobe. How many Kobe students are here? Raise your hands high. Yay! And for those that aren't at our school, I won't use the whole word, who aren't at our school, Kobe is Community Organization and Business Initiatives. I'd like to introduce our committee members who worked so hard on this event, faculty, staff, alumni, and students, who are also executive committee members of our NASW unit. So if you could, I'm going to just introduce everyone, and as we do, if you could stand and give applause when at the conclusion of the introductions. First, Chantel Vachani, who's senior, no, this is not a disciplined group. When I was an exec speaking in front of many more people, I would admonish people. So remain standing, Chantel, don't clap. But in all seriousness, Chantel is senior lecturer here at the school, and for today, you should know, particularly she's chair of our NASW-USC unit. So in all seriousness, Chantel, thank you for your leadership. And but you're going to remain standing. Jeez, you don't listen. No one listens. Jenna Rumberger, my former student and ever student. Jenna is president of our student organization here at the school and is a third-year student. Harmony Frederick. Harmony is director of alumni relations and annual giving here at our school. Melissa Thomas. Melissa is a second-year student in Kobe and also on the executive committee of our NASW unit. Debbie Winters. Debbie is clinical associate professor in field education, and Nikki Cavalier is clinical assistant professor in field education. So now you may all applaud. Now you all may sit down. Thank you, everyone, for being so disciplined. I also want to thank Mary Lou Guevara, if you could stand, who is executive director of the League of Women Voters here in LA. Now you may clap. And she's here today for two reasons. One, as I've already said, to register voters, and any of you who have changed your addresses. But she's also here today with information and material about the election. You want to just stand up again? And all the information about the initiatives, bond measures, and ballot measures. And she'll be happy to answer questions on your way out. So thank you for giving time and being with us today. On a personal level, thinking about the importance of voting, I spent 21 hours on Saturday on an experience going to Las Vegas to register voters. So today, as I'm with you, I'm particularly aware of the importance of our right to vote as central to the essence of our democracy. For me, it was so moving to register 18-year-olds voting for the first time, 2 felons didn't know they could vote, new citizens, a man who happened to be Hispanic, who was 55, who had never voted before and became a citizen 3 months ago. Millennials, some of whom were quite recalcitrant, but you who are here are part of the noble profession, and you understand voting. So it was people young and old, all hues and stripes, a cross-section of our democracy. And for those of us that live the world of academia and practice, I can tell you that it was, for me, a very moving and powerful moment. So today is really in the shadow of that. So why are we here today? We're here today, faculty, students, staff, and alumni, sitting in the room and online, all engaged in the electoral process. All here today to understand the implications from a national, state, and local perspective, to understand where we are going as a society in the midst, and I have to give a bit of a smile, of such a confusing and bewildering period. From Trump to the end of death penalty in the state of California, which the initiative is Proposition 62. So there's a lot going on, and so many other partisan elections, initiatives, ballot and bond measures, and it can be very confusing. So we're here today to understand, as social workers, part of USC, as part of the social work profession, how to understand these times, how to disentangle confusion, how to diminish cynicism, and to know that all of this is so important. Finally, we're here to understand what our roles should be as citizens, as participants, as professionals, all trying to make a difference, all trying to understand what our roles can be and should be. So, to help us understand this bewildering fall, literally and figuratively, it is my pleasure to introduce Dan Schnur, Director of the Jesse Unruh Institute of Politics at USC. How many people in this room have heard of Jesse Unruh? Good. One of the great political figures of the 20th century in California. Dan is also founder and director of the USC Dornsife College of Letters, Arts and Sciences, LA Times poll series. And I know my students who are here read the LA Times, I know online, on a regular basis. So you've seen the polls that Dan has presented. And you're not laughing. I know you're serious because you've been admonished at the beginning of the semester. So in all seriousness, it's Dan I look to as I read the LA Times to his polling, both nationally, statewide, and locally, helps me understand where we are and where we're going. So quickly, Dan's bio is quite remarkable, but just a few highlights. So Dan was former chair of the California Fair Political Practice Commission, founder and former co-chair of the Voices of Reform Project. You can explain to them what that is. Been an instructor at UC Berkeley, you know, that other university, you know, UCLA is across. Taught it at the Kennedy School of Government. He's worked on 4 presidential and 3 gubernatorial campaigns as a leading political strategist here in California for Senator John McCain and Governor Pete Wilson, among others. And I also found it interesting that he's an advisor to key foundations, from the Gates Foundation to Pew Charitable Trust. So it's not to give that long bio, but to understand that a day like today, we're bringing practice and academia together, politics and policy. So it's also my pleasure to introduce my colleague here at our school, Dr. Jacquelyn McCroskey, who will be responded to Dan and help provide context as social worker, academic, and practitioner, as well as helping us understand our individual and collective roles. Jacquelyn is the John Milner Professor of Child Welfare and co-director of the Children's Data Network here at our school, a wonderful agency which focuses on structure financing and performance improvement in and across child welfare and juvenile systems here in LA County. She was appointed, which I didn't know until you sent that to me. It's where academia and practice come together. She was appointed to the LA County Commission on Children and Families just this year. She served on the Policy Roundtable for Child Care and Development. And in 2003, everyone here is a member of NASW right now, right? Everyone joined, student, faculty, alumni. And if you haven't, you'll have an opportunity as students. It costs how much? $57. So Jenna and Melissa will be there. And if you don't have a check, you have a credit card. But in all seriousness, you know, in 2003, the California chapter of NASW named Jacquelyn Social Worker of the Year. That is our profession, and Jacquelyn is very much a leader in it. So first, Dan will address us, followed by Jacquelyn as respondent. Then you will have an opportunity to ask our speakers questions. Remember, ask short and succinct questions, no statements. I know you'd like to, no. So Q&A will be moderated by my colleague Chantel as I slip out along with several of my students to teach my Kobe class in policy advocacy and social change. But in all seriousness, it's an important day for us as a school because we're part of a process and we're part of the election process. And out of today, we should all feel that we know what we're going to do going forward. So with that, Dan?
Well, thank you all very much for letting me join you here today. I've been a big fan of the school, its faculty, and most importantly, its students for many years. I've had the great privilege of speaking to my friend Jim Burklow's class on many occasions over the years. And I was particularly flattered when Peter asked me to come and talk with you today. Peter, I wanted to thank you for that very kind introduction. It might not have sounded like all that much to many of you, but my students at the college are taking their midterms this week. So that is the nicest thing anyone has said about me in public all week long, Peter. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Before I get started, I just want to clarify 2 points about what I see as my role here today. First of all, I teach classes. I teach classes, so you know, in politics, and in communications, and in leadership. But my full-time job, as Peter indicated, is my job is as the director of the Unruh Institute of Politics. My full-time job is to get our students, not just Dornsife, not just poli-sci, but as many USC students across the campus as possible, more motivated and more excited about getting involved not just in traditional politics and government, but a broader definition of public service in any way. So I'm particularly grateful to be able to be here today and talk with you. I will tell you this, it's a terrific job working with the young people who I believe will be our state's, our country's next generation of leaders, and helping them identify their leadership goals and helping them prepare for those leadership challenges. I've worked on 4 campaigns for President of the United States. I've worked on 3 campaigns for Governor of California. This is the best job I have ever had. And in fact, I will tell you, I believe that I have the 3rd best job at the University of Southern California, after only President Nikias and Coach Helton. Earlier this year, I had the 2nd best job at the University of Southern California. But after last Saturday, I'm 3rd again, and I'm a little bit relieved by that. I want to talk to you about the spirit in which I come today. Although, as Peter mentioned, I worked in partisan politics for many years. Several years ago, I changed my party registration to independent, or as we're known here in California, as no party preference voters. But even beyond that, I will tell you the same thing I tell my students in each of my classes at the beginning of every semester. My single biggest pet peeve in higher education, here at SC, up at Cal, at Harvard, at Stanford, anywhere else, my single biggest pet peeve, my single biggest frustration in higher education are professors who are given the privilege of teaching you and your fellow students and misunderstand that privilege to believe that it gives them the right to inflict, and I choose that verb advisedly, to inflict their own ideology and partisan political choices onto you. And I tell my students, undergraduate and graduate alike, whether you're 18 or 19 years old or 24 or 25 or older, I have enough respect for you as a student here at the University of Southern California that I understand that it's not my job to tell you what to think or who to vote for. The best I can hope to do is give you a perspective from which to look at the political landscape and then be confident that you will make the informed decisions that are most relevant to your own priorities. And whether I happen to agree with those or not is absolutely immaterial. So I come here today not on behalf of a party or a candidate or a cause, but rather to try to back up just a step or two and offer a somewhat broader perspective on this political landscape. And instead of talking about what Hillary Clinton might do on the next debate and why Donald Trump said that the other day, what I'd like to do is talk for a few minutes about how we got here. How did we manage to create a political landscape such as this one? A political landscape in which the least popular candidate for President of the United States in modern history is running for office against the 2nd most unpopular candidate for President in modern history. And more relevant, how a political landscape was created in which such populist angst and unhappiness has so reconfigured our political environment. One of the things I teach my students is I tell them that politics doesn't happen in a vacuum. I tell them that politics, in fact, is simply an exaggerated version of society. So although we can talk a little bit later, if you like, about the ballot initiatives, the 17 you'll be wading through this November, and about the campaigns for other offices up and down the ballot, I do want to talk about the presidential campaign. Because for you, for those of you who have decided or are deciding to devote your lives to such a noble cause of helping others, what I hope I can do over the next several minutes is to give you some insight into some of those people, into some segments of the electorate that more than any time in other time in recent history could particularly benefit from the fine work that you do and are learning how to do. You read a lot, you hear a lot, you see a lot of conversation about the angry voter, how angry the electorate is, how furious they are. Well, I have to admit something to you. The voters, at least those who have fueled these populist surges, the voters who fueled Bernie Sanders' campaign in the Democratic primary this past spring and who continue to fuel Donald Trump's campaign this fall, those voters who have animated and who've been the foundation of 2 of the most extraordinary populist political movements in modern political history, most of those voters, I believe, are not as much angry as they are frightened. And I know enough about your school and the work that you do and that you intend to do, is that someone who has those kind of fears is someone who is in particularly dire need of the kind of work that all of you do. So that's what I hope to bring to today's conversation. So let's talk about these frightened voters. First on the right, who have fueled Trump's rise in the polls, and second, those on the left, who were so instrumental in Sanders' rise to political prominence. Who are these voters? And why are they so frightened? Well, let's start with the Trump voters. Because from the very beginning, from last June when he first descended by escalator in Trump Tower to announce his candidacy for President of the United States, there has been a very specific demographic group that has formed the overwhelming majority of his support base. And while that base has grown over the course of the campaign for all sorts of reasons that are probably of much greater interest to political scientists than those of you in the kind of work you're going to be doing in the communities, I want to start out by talking about that particular demographic cohort. Because those voters, these white, male, working class voters who did not have the benefit, like you or me, of a college education, they from the very beginning have been the base on which Donald Trump's support has been built. And one of the real challenges I face when talking to undergrads in my classes is getting them to understand that how many people in our society chose not to go to college, not because they're stupid, not because they're ignorant, not because they're lazy, but because the opportunities simply were not there for them, or for year after year, for decade after decade, for generation after generation. Millions and millions and millions of our fellow Americans were told that they did not need to go to college. They were told, you don't have to go to college. You can realize the American dream without staying in school. You might not get rich, they were told, but you can own a home. You can get a good paying job in a factory, on an assembly line, on a construction site, and you can live the American dream. Not only will you own a home, but you might get a vacation cottage, an RV to take on vacations, a motorcycle or a small motorboat. Your children will go to college, and when you retire, you will have an adequate pension to allow you to live out your years in comfort, enjoying your children and your grandchildren. And for years, for decades, tens of millions of our fellow Americans took that deal. And they did everything we asked them to do. They went to work every morning. They worked hard every day. And even when they weren't working, they did everything we ask of people to become pillars in their community. They volunteered at their children's schools. They were active in their churches or their synagogues or their mosques. They coached their children's little league and soccer teams. They did everything we asked them to do, year after year, decade after decade. And then a funny thing happened. And what was the funny thing that happened? Well, we went and changed from being an industrial-driven economy to a technology-driven economy. And all these working class people who decided not to go to college because they didn't need a college degree in order to succeed in an industrial-based economy, all of a sudden they realized there wasn't a place for them in the technology-driven economy. They had the misfortune, just the bad timing, to hit their 30s, their 40s, or their 50s at the time that their country, that their society was undergoing the greatest economic and technological upheaval since the Industrial Revolution. And in the Industrial Revolution, when we shifted from an agrarian to an industrial economy, millions and millions of our fellow Americans, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they might not have liked what they had to do, but they knew what they had to do. It might have been wrenching, it might have been difficult, it might have been traumatic, but they knew what to do. They left their family farms that their parents and grandparents attended, and they went to the city to get a job in a factory or on an assembly line or on a construction site. But fast forward to 2016, and that 50-something white working class male who is supporting a family and knows his job is going away in the not too distant future, that path doesn't exist for him. He knows he's not going to move to Silicon Valley and acquire financing for a social networking startup. He doesn't know what's going to come next, and he's terrified. And what's worse for him, or for her, is, at least according to our polling, not just these voters, but the broader electorate, understanding the nature of this extraordinary economic change that we're going through, the voters of this state and this country have almost no confidence whatsoever that their elected officials, Democrat or Republican, have any idea of what to do to help them through it. So they're scared, and they feel abandoned, and they feel alone. And all of a sudden, this candidate shows up, and he says to them, my words, not his, he says to them, I got your back. I understand. And he says, his words, not mine, let's make America great again. And while I personally have some discomfort with the word again, because intentionally or unintentionally, I do not pretend to know, regardless, it sends a message to a lot of us who did not benefit from advances in civil rights and equal rights for women, on those involved in same-sex relationships. It sends the unfortunate message that the again does not include them. But for that working class white man working on the assembly line who knows his plant is about to shut down, again sounds pretty good, because it reminds him of the economy into which he entered when he was 17, 18, 19 years old many, many years ago. So let's talk for a moment then about another demographic group, those who fueled the rise of Bernie Sanders' campaign throughout last fall and last spring. And for those of you who do not think that Bernie Sanders succeeded, I will point out to you that 1 year ago today, Bernie Sanders enjoyed name recognition of approximately 1.5% in public opinion polls. And if any reasonable political observer believed that Hillary Clinton would be taken all the way to and through the California Democratic primary, not by Joe Biden and not by Elizabeth Warren, but by a septuagenarian socialist from Vermont, I would suggest to you that that is overcoming expectations. Hello, Jim. That is overcoming expectations in an extraordinary way. I didn't mean to reference you when I was talking about septuagenarian socialists. You just happened to show up when I was talking about it. Okay. Boy, am I in trouble now. Now look, you guys, most of you, are a lot more familiar with the demographic that fueled Bernie Sanders' rise in the polls than the group I was just talking about. Why? Because most of you are that group. If the white working class males of a certain age were the foundation and are still the foundation of Donald Trump's political support, there's also a core demographic that was key to Sanders' rise. Millennials and post-millennials. And for those of you in the room who are post-millennials, I should be the first to let you know, you've now been named by us old people, you are the Snapchat generation. So get used to it, because it's going to be with you for many, many, many years. So let's talk for a couple minutes before Jacquelyn weighs in. Let's talk about what millennials and post-millennials might be afraid of. When I talk to older groups off campus of what we'll call diplomatically pre-millennials, I try to explain to them that just like those working class voters who did everything we asked of them throughout their careers, that the millennial generation has done everything we've asked of you too. And I explained to them how much more complicated the application admission process is for college and graduate school now than it was back in our day. And I explained to them that these amazing millennials who I have the privilege of teaching every day, they did everything we asked them to do too. You did. Not just good grades and good test scores, but you played a sport, you played in the band, you volunteered, you got involved in your community, you did everything you could possibly do to get into a good college, and then after that it kept going. You didn't just get good grades, you did internships, maybe you did semesters abroad, it just kept going. And then a millennial graduates in the middle of the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. And all of a sudden, thousands, millions of these millennials are, if not unemployed, are underemployed, or even if they are full-time employed, are working in jobs that do not take full advantage of their intellectual capacity and creative skills. There was a study that was released last summer. Many of you may have seen it. It showed that for the first time in our history, more young people live at home with their parents than live with partners. And what I will tell you from my own research is that those millennials who are still living at home with their parents are not happy about it. Now, not that their parents are either. I must admit, my research is not particularly up to date. I haven't checked in on it since last night. But I'll ask again tonight, and my guess is that overall sentiment has not changed. So once again, you have an entire generation that's done everything we've asked of you. And all of a sudden, you're looking ahead at a future, a longer future than these working class white guys, and saying, wait a minute, I held up my end of the deal. Why aren't they, whoever they happen to be, holding up theirs? And when Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders from opposite ends of the political spectrum says, I understand your fear, I understand your frustration, I got your back, and the rest of these politicians are talking about tinkering and adjusting and realigning, I'm going to talk to you, says Trump or says Sanders, about dramatic change, even radical change. Because you know in your lives, whether you are a 55-year-old construction worker or a 23-year-old USC graduate, that you did everything you were supposed to do, and the other end didn't hold, and the other side didn't hold up their end of the deal. And the result on both sides with both of these groups is fear. These are frightened people. And what do frightened people do? What do frightened people need? Well, this is a subject area that every single person in this room understands far better than I do, because you've decided to devote your lives and your careers providing comfort and direction and support to people who are frightened because they don't know how to overcome the challenges that life has put in front of them. I think what you do is admirable. I think what you do is noble. And I know that what you do has never been more needed and more necessary than any other time in modern American history than it is now. Because people, not just these frightened people, but American people, according to our polls, they don't know where to turn. They don't trust their political leaders. They don't believe that politicians know the answers. They don't trust business or labor leaders or community leaders or religious leaders. They're looking for someone or someones who can help them overcome these challenges. And that's what you do. In a short while after Jacquelyn has finished her response, her presentation, we'll both be eager to take your questions and to continue this conversation in whatever way that you think is most helpful. But my role today is simply limited to one of diagnosing a problem. Everybody in this room knows better than I do how to answer it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dan, for putting this in our wheelhouse. And I'm so grateful that you didn't say, and Jacquelyn knows how to answer it, so thank you for that, too. So I want to talk a little bit about my sort of story as a social worker and not make it try to bring the global down to the much more specific in terms of what many of us do on a daily basis. So I was going to be an actress, and I suddenly figured out that probably wasn't the right, and I just by happenstance got a job as a probation officer at Central Juvenile Hall here in LA. Because actually a family friend said, oh, you're working with teenagers, you're teaching acting, would you like to make a lot of money? Duh. And so after a little bit of that experience, 2 years, I realized that unlike what people thought, the problem really was not the kids. The problem was really the systems and how disconnected these systems were from the realities that the kids were facing and that their families were facing. And so I said, okay, I should go to social work school and try to figure out what this means and what you do about it. And my first policy class was the one that left me most puzzled, maybe because I had the highest hopes for it. But the first policy class was more like, here's a list of laws that you need to know. It's like, it's all been decided. These are the laws you need to know in different systems. And it was like, okay, that's not going to help me figure out how to change these systems. I know none of our students would ever say that, but I went to another program a long time ago. And I think our profession, there is an issue with becoming overwhelmed. We can't take care of everything. We can't be everybody to, everything to everybody in every circumstance. And maybe especially now, because it feels like all of our systems are having really deep troubles for all the reasons that Dan laid out. So I went to work and had several experiences that made me sort of get closer and closer, hopefully, to how do we understand the interactions of policy, social policy, institutional policies, and politics that interweave through every level of policy and decision making. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. So one of the things I worked on in 1980s was an attempt to convince the County Board of Supervisors that they weren't really getting at the core of what was going wrong in child and family services, because they looked at each of their 34 departments as completely separate entities. And so we did something we called the LA County Children's Budget, how much money is being spent by each of those departments on services for families and children that don't interact with each other, that don't talk to each other, that don't use our resources effectively. And we actually got really good response from the most important body of elected officials here in this place, our County Board of Supervisors. And we set up something called the Children's Planning Council to try to create that kind of, I'm not going to go through every step, but just a couple of examples. I also have been, as Peter mentioned, on, I don't know, 5 or 6 major commissions in LA County over time, not all at the same time, thank goodness. So what I could see was the role of elected official, the role of department leadership and administrators, the role of line staff, oftentimes being completely misaligned. That, and particularly because we have such large-scale bureaucracies, the difficulty of figuring out how to get people to talk to each other wasn't just across departments, it was within streams, because it's very difficult if you're an elected official to have hands-on understanding that a children's social worker does, or a deputy probation officer does, or a mental health contract worker does, a clinician does, et cetera. And so that was another piece of my learning, but the continuing to make sure that people are at the front line, have the chance to inform both the administrators and the elected officials is really something essential for social workers to continue to work at. We haven't figured it out, but if we can't get what we know from the front line up through that line, we're not going to have much chance of actually improving these systems. One of the things I work on now, I'm very engaged with a whole group of people here in the county. It's trying to get access to subsidized childcare for young children who come to the attention of our Department of Children and Family Services. So the only group that's growing in terms of the referrals to child welfare is kids under the age of 2. And that keeps going up. It's close to 40% of the kids in our system are at least under age 5. And all the other groups are going down because some of our reforms are taking hold. But these young children who are at such disadvantage from everything that's happened to them before don't get, when they come into our systems, one of the key things we know can make a huge difference for them in the long term. They don't get access to high quality childcare. Why? Because the child care system and the child welfare system are at odds with each other. We don't speak to each other well, we don't communicate well, and we've spent the last 2 years trying to get some clarity through legislation on this issue so that more of those kids would have that opportunity. We're not giving up. I'm just giving you these examples to show the multiple ways in which I've experienced this and why I am even more committed today than I was at the beginning to connecting social workers to not only direct practice, but to administration and to policy. And if you cannot make the connection between those things, we can't be effective in the long run for our clients. We can't be effective in the organizations we serve because we don't really understand where the problems are coming from. So it's important to me on a professional level. Also personally, I realized later one of the reasons why I was so deeply affected by this job at probation is that both of my brothers by that time had already been arrested multiple times, and they were more so over the next few years. My father then became an elected official, and he served as an elected official in Colorado for 25 years. My daughter has for several years worked for a very prominent political family. I'm not going on the partisan stuff. And I work with elected members of the Board of Supervisors, with the mayor of LA, with city council people, with school board members, some of whom are graduates from this school. So I see every day that we're not where we need to be in terms of being able to make the case for what it is that our agencies and our programs do, and how do we use that information to inform decision making. So I don't know, my final recommendations or something. One is, please understand, realize, look for it, just accept it. Policy and politics are always entwined every single day, and that's why elections really count, because the people that we put in office have opportunities to make things better. The ballot initiatives that we agree to or don't agree to have the opportunity to make things better. And it sometimes, as I said, feels like it's too much, but it's really, really important. And I think the bottom line for me is that I've understood is that elections are essentially about social connection. They're about inclusion. They're about making societies where everybody feels like they've got a place and a part to play. And Dan illustrated that beautifully. And social connection is us. But the other thing that elections are about is that they determine how resources are distributed. And that is essential to our clients, that we continue to be vigilant, informed, interested in how are resources distributed and what difference is that going to make for the groups that we care about most. So I'm going to turn this over to Chantel now, and if you'd all just give the hard questions to Dan, that'd be great.
All right. Thank you, Dr. McCroskey and Dan Schnur. I am going to have some closing remarks at the end, but looking out into the room, I learned a new word today, Snapchat generation. So to the Snapchats, to the millennials, to the baby boomers, and to all of that, to be able to be in a room together and have this conversation as a policy instructor, as a social worker and an attorney, I can't tell you how exciting this is, and it makes me to know that you guys are so engaged. So we're not done after today, and we'll talk about that after. But I want to open it up, and if I could ask Dr. McCroskey and Dan Schnur to come up here over near the podium, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to have, for the Q&A session, for those that have questions, we're going to use the standing mic over there. So don't all stand up at once, but go ahead and come over here. We can lower the mic if we need to, and we can ask our questions. If I could just ask everyone to speak into the mic because we are live streaming. So maybe we'll take a few speakers. All right, we have our first one. Great, thank you. And whoever, both, you can, I think they're both working, and you can address whoever. And just to let you know, one of the reasons that when we were planning this and thinking about what we wanted to get out of this, we definitely wanted to talk about politics. But we recognize the intrinsic interconnection between politics, policy, and practice. And the fact that you guys are here signifies that you either already recognize this or you want to learn more. And so the goal really in bringing together a practitioner who does policy and pretty much everything you could think of in the field of social work, and also an expert in all that is politics, policy, and kind of how it all comes together, is for you guys to kind of see where micro, macro, meso all come together. So I'm hoping your questions really do bring out that depth of expertise that we have in the panel. All right, thank you.
No pressure, Kate.
Okay, I'm Kate Sacknoff, and I am representing the younger end of the boomers. And my question, I think, is pretty purely political. I totally buy what you were saying about the economic and fear-based reactions. But I am wondering, do you think that to any extent the rise of Trump has something to do with a reaction to Obama, a reaction to having the first African-American president?
The first thing I would say is I don't believe that Donald Trump is a cause very much. I think he's a symptom of a challenge that we face in society. And are there people in our society who absolutely refuse to accept a president of a different ethnic heritage? Of course there are those people. And there always have been. I get asked pretty frequently, is this the most hate-filled presidential election ever? Is this the election with the most lies ever? Is this the election with the most bigotry ever? And the answer is no. In fact, it is probably tied with about 54 other presidential elections for having the most hatred and the most bigotry. But the difference is, of course, is not just, I said earlier that politics is an exaggeration of society. Not just in politics, but in society. We now all have these. And the empowering aspects of these phones are tremendous. It allows voters to speak back to power in a way we never could before. More importantly, it allows us to speak horizontally to each other, to organize and mobilize on behalf of just causes in a way that was much more difficult, even just 10 years ago. Imagine organizing the March on Washington with one of these. But everybody gets one of these, or at least has the capability. And that means haters get them too. And the First Amendment, of course, is for both the good and the bad, for both the just and the evil. I'm not sure I'd be entirely comfortable with the people at Apple or at Samsung saying, you deserve a phone for your cause, and you just don't deserve one for yours. And what that means is those haters who have become increasingly isolated in modern day America can now find common cause with each other and find false comfort in how many of them that there are. I talked earlier about fear, both among Trump's core supporters and Sanders. And I think it's worth taking a moment to think about, what do frightened people do? Frightened people run away. People run away from things that scare them. One of the things that I teach my students in my leadership class is that what leaders do is they don't run away from danger, they walk toward it. But first they reassure their friends and their neighbors who are more frightened than they are, that if you walk toward that challenge together, that you can overcome it. But what else do frightened people do? Frightened people look for other people to blame. And through American history, through world history, we fear the other. We fear people who don't look like us. We fear people who don't talk like us. And increasingly, for those of us who grew up in multi-ethnic societies, increasingly we fear people who don't think like us. And that's no better than holding a bias against someone because they come from a different heritage than you do. Trump is a symptom of all of that. in another way, so is Sanders. I'm not equating the two. I'm just saying they represent two equally frightened cohorts, albeit in very, very different ways. And the obligation that all of you have in the careers that you've chosen for yourself is to reassure those frightened people, to remind them if you walk toward challenges together, you can overcome them. And most importantly, to remind them that somebody who doesn't look like them or talk like them or think like them isn't someone to be afraid of. It's an opportunity to grow an even greater and stronger community.
Hi, my name is Keith DeMolder. And so a question I have, earlier you spoke about the they, in terms of the millennials and the hardworking middle or lower classes were working and did what they were supposed to for this other they. Can you go into specifics about who the they was? Was it politicians at the time, or was it these big corporate people? Who was the they in that situation?
It's a great question. Who is the they? It goes back to what I was saying a moment ago. It's people who don't look like me and don't talk like me and who don't think like me. A lot of that blame gets put on these quote-unquote political establishment. And it is Hillary Clinton's misfortune that while by one scale of measurement, she is the most qualified candidate for President of the United States since Richard Nixon in 1968, she also happens to be running for president at the exact moment when establishment and politicians represent the they. Beyond that common denominator, some people hate business leaders and bankers. Other people hate labor unions and community organizers. The they are the people who you don't see every day. The they are the people whose challenges you don't understand because you never see them. They are the people who go to watch a different cable channel and listen to different radio programs and go to different websites and Facebook pages. If the only time you're ever exposed to someone with whom you disagree is when they're held up as an object of ridicule, they're not a reasonably intelligent person with whom you happen to disagree. They're an evil person and they're a stupid person who is intentionally standing in the way of you achieving everything that you've turned out to, which is a typically long-winded professorial way of saying the they is in the eye of the beholder.
Hi, my name is Jason Woodrum. I'm a second-year adult health and aging student. I want to thank you both for your remarks earlier. In regards to the economic argument for the Trump voter, I think that was really fascinating. One thing that I do find problematic, and this actually is pretty much from day one of the Trump campaign, has been the dog whistling and underpinnings of a white nationalist movement within it. I think that when you have a candidate who, in front of 80 million American viewers, says that he has nothing to say in response to people of color over his accusations that our current president wasn't born in the United States, or you have his vice presidential candidate who openly refuses to denounce David Duke. There's some very problematic and troubling things that are occurring here. And not to mention that this is a candidate who...
I'm sorry, I ask this with all the respect in the world. Is there a question?
Yeah, this is where we go from a macro to a micro level.
This is where we go from a several paragraph statement to a question.
So what do you recommend that we say to people of color who are responding to an environment where Donald Trump wants to forcefully deport, by his own words, 11 million people and wants to establish a national movement for stop and frisk as a police policy?
So thank you for the question. It gives me a chance to clarify a point that I thought I made earlier but should probably make again. The observations I offered were not intended as a defense of any political candidate or any voter group, but rather just one potential explanation on why two very different groups of aggrieved voters have reacted in the way that they have. Do I believe that there are racist components within Donald Trump's support base? Of course I do. Do I believe that there are voters whose opinions I would find irrational among Sanders or Clinton's or Cruz's or Rubio's support base? Of course I would. Do I happen to believe that asking the same federal government that was unable to evacuate the city of New Orleans with a week's notice before Hurricane Katrina hit, putting them in charge of the removal of 11.5 million people from this country is a workable idea? I do not. If you do the arithmetic, assume 75 people per bus, you would need to line buses from San Diego, California to Fairbanks, Alaska, and then have that motorcade somehow move south of the border and disperse 11.5 million people back to their original country of origin. I find that both practically and philosophically unacceptable. So although I generally tend to leave my politics out of these presentations, I did want to make it clear that I'm not taking sides or defending anyone. What I'm simply saying is that for a working class white voter who filled the jobs that I talked about earlier that no longer exist, at least not to the numbers that they once did, that person's looking for a candidate who offers some understanding of their predicament. And I think it's an indictment of the political leadership of both parties that a candidate whose understanding of that predicament, combined with the kind of sentiments you talked about, has been so successful. But nature abhors a vacuum, and so does politics. And that vacuum was filled this year.
Hi, my name is Veronica, and I'm a dual degree student with social work and public administration. One of the big things and I wanted to get your take from both of you, that I was really wondering about in terms of the issue of gender issues. Obviously, this is a historical moment, and so in terms of polls, what kinds of things are you finding coming from the different genders? I know you were talking a lot about, white men, but I wanted to hear more in terms of, polls and surveys and your experiences too in terms of also the female, male, transgender. We have, different experiences now too. So if you can share about that, thanks.
Well, by looking at me, you can tell which way I go. And so as a woman who's been working a long time in a system that hasn't exactly been friendly to women all the time, I'm really thrilled that we've arrived at this moment just because there's a serious candidate, as opposed to, when people say, oh, there have been candidates before. I think it's really, really, really important. I'm trying really hard because this whole thing, I'm one of those frightened people, I think, about what's going to be at the end. I'm trying not to track all the polls too closely, but I can tell you that it is sparking discussion in classrooms, amongst friends, in workplaces, in all kinds of places that I think is really healthy. And it's very clear that it's not just men versus women, right? It's age groups, it's older people, younger people, it's racial and ethnic groups, it's parts of the country, it's probably even professions, right? That social workers can have a different view of some of this than, I don't know, just to pick on business majors for a minute. But I think it's highlighting the fact that we develop our values and our attitudes as individuals, but when someone appeals to us on the basis of a group membership that we feel strongly about, it's pretty hard to resist that call.
In 2008, when Hillary Clinton ran against Senator Barack Obama for the Democratic nomination, Clinton's campaign at the outset assumed that the first plausible female candidate for President of the United States in American history would enjoy overwhelming support from female voters in the primary. And it was only as the primary progressed that they saw that there was a tremendous generational gap in between female supporters for Clinton and for Obama. And to a large degree, that same generational gap among female voters was reflected again this past year in support among female voters of my generation and female voters of yours. There's a terrific book out written about the 2008 campaign called Notes from the Cracked Ceiling. And the first third of the book is about Hillary Clinton's campaign for president. And the Clinton section opens with a vignette in which Geraldine Ferraro, the first female vice presidential candidate in American history, is talking to her adult daughter. And Ferraro's adult daughter has just told her, Ferraro, that she, the daughter, is going to be voting for Barack Obama, not Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary for president. And Representative Ferraro's response, and I am paraphrasing, is something along the lines of, "Are you effing kidding me?" And what's been fascinating to watch in both elections is how much more reluctant younger female voters have been to embrace Clinton's candidacy than older voters. I am, by my count, the 34th, 35th, 36th, 37th, 38th, 39th most qualified person in this room to talk to that gender and generational gap. So what I will do instead is I'll offer you two theories that my amazing undergrads have offered. One of them, and this comes out of Notes from the Cracked Ceiling because we used the book in my leadership class, is the author postulated that young women, millennial women, have been told ever since they were old enough to remember that women can accomplish anything, that women can be CEOs, that women can be judges, that women can be governors, that women can be presidents. And son of a gun, it turns out that the millennial women, for the most part, believe that. And what that seems to have done is not lessened their belief in the importance of having a female president of the United States, but lessened the urgency for it, which is, of course, we will have a woman as president. But if it's not this year, it'll be in 4 years and 8 years when a woman comes along who is a closer fit ideologically to what I believe. The second and more eloquent answer I'll offer you is from an amazing 19-year-old woman who was involved in a program we did on this subject last spring. A young woman stood up and she said, "I'm a third-wave feminist, and I have no bounds for my admiration and gratitude for Hillary Clinton, for Gloria Steinem, for the second-wave feminists and all that they've accomplished." And she said, "What Hillary Clinton has not yet explained to me is why, in addition to my gratitude, why her candidacy is relevant to the very different goals I have as a third-wave feminist than those that she accomplished and she and her colleagues accomplished in the 70s or 80s or 90s. There is a gender gap in politics that's existed for over 30 years. Women tend to vote Democrat, men tend to vote more Republican. There's a marriage gap also, and if there's time, we can talk more about that. But to me, the most interesting thing about the candidacy of the first plausible female candidate for president is how divided female voters have been over that candidacy. And I'm not suggesting that older or younger women are right or wrong. That's not my place to say. But it does point to a fascinating dynamic, again, not just in politics, but in society.
Brindise. I'm a second-year Kobe student, and my question is for Mr. Schnur. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Okay, good. My question is, do you think that the outcome of the November 8th election, presidential election, whatever it might be, is the beginning of kind of reconciling these two opposite sides of fear, or is it only going to lead to further divide?
Boy, that is a great question. That is a great question. My concern is that this divide is going to grow larger before it narrows. And I think that happens regardless of who is elected president, regardless of which party controls the Congress. Our political system has become so polarized and so hyper-partisan, and this goes back to a point that I was making earlier, that because every one of us can construct an information environment that tailors itself to our beliefs, it becomes easier and easier to isolate ourselves from those with whom we disagree. I'll pull out my trusty phone for a second to offer you an analogy. So, how much do I love my smartphone? So much that my wife and my kids actually worry about how much I love my smartphone. And why do I love it? And why do almost all of you love yours? Because it empowers me. Because it allows me to watch whatever I want to read whatever I want to listen to whatever I want to, whenever I want to. And that's empowering for all the reasons I talked about earlier when it comes to politics. We can talk back to power and we can organize each other in ways we never could before. But if this is the great part about the advances in technology, here's the downside, these earplugs. Because once I put the plugs in my ears to listen to my favorite music, I very quickly lose any interest whatsoever in what you're listening to. So let me give you an example. Let's say for the sake of argument that Chantel and I commute to work together. We commute to USC every day. So several years ago, back when I was just starting out and when she was in high school, we're commuting to work together. And what we do is we would take turns choosing the radio station. In the morning, we'd listen to her favorite music. As most of you know, Chantel is into gangster rap, not mainstream, not Jay-Z, not Kanye, but the hardcore, Get the Police kind of stuff. And in the morning, we'd listen to Chantel's gangster. On the way home at night, we'd listen to my music, to my Gilbert and Sullivan, because that's how I roll. And while we might not convince each other to become fans of each other's music, at least we're exposed to something different. Maybe I don't become a rap fan, but maybe I learn something about urban culture and the challenges of urban living that I wouldn't have known otherwise. She might not become a fan of opera, but maybe she learns something about European culture and history that she wouldn't have otherwise known. So let's raise the stakes on that. If instead of the stakes being country versus hip hop, suppose the stakes are whether to raise taxes to pay for a greater level of government services. Suppose whether the stakes are how to fix a broken system of public education. Suppose the stakes are whether and under what circumstances to send US military troops back to a region that we thought we'd left behind many times over the last 15 years. If one person's watching Fox and the other's watching Comedy Central, if one likes Hannity and the other likes Huffington, we're not just coming to different conclusions, we're experiencing two entirely different versions of reality. And going back to what I said earlier, finding common ground with people to whom you are never exposed, except when they're held up as objects of ridicule, is not going to happen. So now some of this happens as a result of human nature, and I know we need to wrap up, so I'll just spend another minute on this because I think it's an important question. Some of this is human nature. It is only human nature for all of us to want to talk to and listen to and read and learn from the smartest people in the world. Who are the smartest people in the world? Well, they're the people who agree with me, whether I'm reading or listening to them from the left or the right. So what I'm going to leave with is I'm going to give you guys the same assignment that I give my students in all of my classes at the end of every single semester, because this is what's ultimately going to get to the solution that you and I both want to happen. I ask my students on the last day of class every fall and every spring the following. I said, I want every principled conservative in this class to watch Rachel Maddow or Samantha Bee at least once a week. And I want every principled progressive in this class to read George Will or David Brooks once a week. Not because I'm trying to change your mind, but because I'm trying to open it. And I'm trying to remind you that people with whom you disagree are not evil or stupid, and they're not all bigoted, and that it's really, really easy to look for the most intolerable outliers on the other side and use them as an excuse not to engage. But ultimately, if you want to accomplish the kind of goal you're talking about, it's not something the politicians are going to do for us. It's something that we're going to do for ourselves, if and only if we decide it's worth taking the plugs out of our ears to listen to what somebody with whom we disagree has to say.
I just want to, yay. And I want to add one thing to this, because one of the things that I think is most important for social workers over the last decade or so is that we know so much more about neurobiology than we did before. If you're interested in this topic, there's a fascinating book called Brain and Culture, because you know how the brain cells develop in the early years of life, right, is through serve and return with the caregiver. Those that get used grow, those that don't get used prune. Why is it that people follow so closely in the footsteps of their families and their families' belief systems? Why is it that it's so hard for those of us who say, I am never going to do that thing that my mother did to me? Is because our brains, actually, the architecture of our brains are shaped from the very earliest days. And so there's the social interactions of now, but there's also for us as social workers, understanding that there is something else going on here, and it starts very early on in family situations. So, Chantal.
You guys can stay up here just for a second. So I have 2 minutes. I had 20 minutes planned, but I have 2. So I'm going to give, I have a few things I just want to do. But first, I want to thank Dan Schnur and Dr. Jacquelyn McCroskey. This level of expertise and wisdom in the room, and not just for our presenters, but for everybody that's in here, and to bring you all together is such an honor. From the NASW-USC Unit, we thank you very much. And so first I'm going to thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to, for Marilu over there, from the League of Women Voters, get this, and also just to let you remind you guys that Marilu is over there for resources. Please do connect with her with the League of Women Voters. They're an amazing resource to trying to make sense of all this. But I also wanted to just kind of wrap it up to remind us that this is a conversation, and we're all here because we want to learn, because we care. That doesn't mean that everybody around us can learn or has the privilege to be in this room and be able to learn in the way that we are able to. And I think it's up to us, not just to vote, that's a given. You do vote, register if you're not, to get someone else to vote, register them to vote, but to have these conversations and share this information. We are social workers, most of us, most are not, but we are social workers at heart, and it is our job to start where our client is. And our client is society. And if we're talking about they and us and them and the others, as social workers, it's our job to connect in whatever way we can to do that. So I hope that we're able to take that micro, macro, meso bridge and be able to say they are all one and the same. We are brothers of society, and we must do something. So please share the information, learn more, share with the people that don't already know. Preaching to the choir is easy, but preaching to people that may not agree with you it's hard, it's challenging, and it helps us to use our social worker skills, our diplomatic skills, our motivational interviewing, all of those. So I want you guys to remember that you're having these interesting conversations in the next couple of weeks, and also remember the elections come and go. But the fact that you guys are going to be hopefully doing this work relentlessly for the rest of your lives as social justice warriors and advocates is what matters. And so just remember that this is the beginning. As an attorney who works on policy, the social worker who works on policy, I know that getting the policy in place is one thing. Implementation is 90% of the game. So getting someone in out of office, getting something in is just one small part of a much bigger picture. And so as we work with our clients, remember that our clients are impacted by society and by the policies that shape society. So I urge you guys to remember that as you have these conversations respectfully with those that disagree. So thank you, and also please join the NASW unit. Also, I want to thank two people that really helped us pull all three, actually, helped us pull all this together. We want to thank the Dean, Marilyn Flynn, who wasn't able to join us today, but for generous support, not just of this particular event, but also for the entire NASW-USC unit, which is going on our second year. And we also want to thank alumni affairs, for always being our partner in crime and really being able to bring together staff, students, faculty, alumni. It's rare that we all get to come and talk about these things on a level playing field. So thank you so much for always being willing to partner and providing us that support. And also I want to thank you guys for being here, for acknowledging the importance of this. For those of you that, social workers that are like policy, I hope that as the time that you guys have here, those conversations change. So thank you very, very much. Make sure to go out and check out Marilu's table, and we will hopefully see you just around. We are going to be working on a one-day policy advocacy lobby conference in February, let's say, where we're going to be bringing in elected officials. This is the beginning. We're going to be working on giving you guys the tools as practitioners or future practitioners to actually make systemic change, to effectuate that. So please stay with us, join our listserv so we can get you information on those events, and stay involved. So thank you very much.